Now, we've talked about some gloomy things today, so for the last segment of today's broadcast, let's brighten the mood a little. Even though crypto wall is kind of scary, and even some police stations have paid ransoms to retrieve their encrypted assets, my final guest says that most ransomware isn't as complex as you think, and he will be presenting a session on that topic tomorrow. Chief Architect at LastLine, Engin Kirda. Engin, thank you for making the time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So, do you think that we are a little more scared of ransomware than maybe we should be?
Indeed, I do. So,
yeah.
So
that's good.
So I think I wouldn't want people to think that ransomware is not a problem. It is a problem, but I think if you look at ransomware, we look at the big picture compared to other types of malware we're seeing out there. The study we conducted basically shows that maybe it's not as bad as a problem as we think, and I think we can come up with effective ways of actually detecting ransomware attacks.
Okay, well, so what is it that we're scared of that maybe we shouldn't be? What when you say it's not as complex as we think, what is it that makes it not so complex?
Right, that's a good question. So when we talk about complexity or sophistication, typically as security professionals, we look at how the code tries to detect evade detection.
Right.
So because we can't detect it, we automatically assume, hey, this must be sophisticated because we're not able to detect it. But if you look at the attack payloads, if you look at what this sample actually does, what this family actually does in practice, the types of things that they do are not always as complex or sophisticated as most reports out there might claim. For example, the way they delete files might not be as bad as it seems because you might be able to retrieve the files, or when they use cryptography, in a number of cases they actually use cryptography in a bad way so that we can still recover the data because we can recover some of the keys. And in cases where there's more sophisticated, maybe more complex ransomware like CryptoWall or CryptoLocker, yes, the cryptography is actually good, but that's typical good software engineering. So if you look at the fact that they're actually using cryptography, this is something you might be able to detect during the analysis phase and use it actually against the ransomware.
Okay, well, explain that further.
Right. So when you look at what the ransomware actually does in practice, like CryptoLocker, CryptoWall, some of the more modern samples that we're seeing are actually using Microsoft's cryptography libraries, right? Oh. And during the analysis, when you're looking at these samples, if you see that they're using Microsoft's crypto APIs, this is something you could actually use as an indicator to detect ransomware. So, I'm going to be talking about some heuristics that you can use and some specific type of ransomware behaviors you can actually use to detect ransomware more effectively. So I think in practice, using modern dynamic analysis systems, we should be able to detect quite a number of the samples out there.
All right, that's very heartening. I know we've spoken before, and you also said that some ransomware out there actually claims to do things that it doesn't really do. So
definitely there's ransomware out there that's more complicated, that they do things that are nasty, but there are also a lot of samples that we looked at in our study that claim to do certain things. For example, it might claim to do good encryption, but in reality it doesn't do it. Or it might claim that it's going to delete things, but in practice it actually doesn't delete things. So some of the things that they claim are actually exaggerated because they know that people are going to fall for this anyway. So maybe 60% of the stuff we're seeing out there do things that are actually quite straightforward and not as complicated.
Now, is that partly, do you think, because ransomware is going after regular users most of the time? It's not going after the big corporations, it's kind of going after individuals. Is that part of it?
Exactly. So that's one big issue. So most of the victims today are end users who are not technically sophisticated, and that's why the attack in reality doesn't have to be that sophisticated. Of course, we've seen cases where companies have also been attacked, but if you look at other types of malware out there, more targeted attacks or things that are more stealthy, that do bad things, ransomware typically isn't a big problem for many companies because, they have backups, they know how to protect themselves.
But now, I know that there is ransomware out there that also will encrypt your backups. Right. So there definitely is some ransomware out there that is just as bad as we think it is. So you're not putting everything into this category.
Absolutely. So, I think the point I'd like to make is I'd like to set this threat in perspective, right? Compared to other types of malware we have out there that are, that typically remain in the background. You don't even know that you've been infected. It doesn't inform you that you've been infected. Ransomware does certain things that are actually detectable, because if you're infected, ransomware actually tells you that you've been infected, right? Which is, I think,
nice that way. It's helpful.
Exactly. It's actually a big advantage if you're looking at it from an attack, from a defender's point of view, because you can use things like that in your detection phase if you have a technology. For example, ransomware typically shows something to you. It's a ransom note, and in the background, it continues to do things, right? So if you look at behaviors like these, it's actually a big advantage, because for other types of malware, you would not know, because it would stay in the background, it would remain very stealthy. I think it's a huge advantage that ransomware typically actually tells you that you've been infected.
So what kinds of tools then would help us detect this stuff?
I think today a good technology that many people are actually using are sandboxing technologies, where you take a piece of potentially malicious code, you run it, and then you look at what it actually does. And if you're dealing with ransomware, you might see things like, hey, it's actually encrypting something, right? Or it's actually looking for many different files. So these are types of behaviors I think that you can use in automation, in the detection of a threat like ransomware. So I think compared to other types of malware we're seeing, ransomware is a potentially a solvable problem. But of course, you do have samples that are very nasty, right? But if you look at the big picture, I think many of them are actually solvable.
Okay, so that's actually some positive news that we can end on. So thank you for giving us
Being
a bright
positive.
spot to end on. Thank you so much. That's Engin Kirda, Chief Architect at LastLine.